All right, today we're talking about how to build legacy wealth, especially how to teach the next generation to really have a good attitude, to have a good work ethic, and to manage money and not squander it. My guest today is Shannon Robnett. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I'm the host of this show. And you know, if you've listened previously, that each week I feature smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. Go check out the archives. Lots of great episodes for you there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, our company where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn all about what we do by going to rise25.com. All right, I'm excited to have our guest here today. His name is Shannon Robnett. He's the CEO of Shannon Robnett Industries. He's a principal at Vertical Equity LLC, Phoenix Commercial Construction, and Executive Management Services. He's been in real estate development and syndication for about 30 years or so, and he actually is part of 5 generations, including the next generation. So 4 generations above him, if I'm doing my math right, maybe 3. We're all in real estate, and that is what he has dedicated his career to. And so we're going to talk about that. But also, more importantly, he and I met at a conference, and we had a great conversation about how to raise your kids the right way, to have the right attitude, the right work ethic, to spend their money in the right way, how to invest the money. And he's got some great stories around that. But Shannon, I'm excited to have you here today, and I want to hear about Snow Shack. You had a shaved ice business. And the funny thing about that is you learned out pretty quickly. Maybe we're giving away too many samples because
Yeah,
your friends are coming by and you're like, yeah, sure, take a
yeah,
shave ice. And you realize, well, that doesn't really help with the bottom line.
yeah. John, we were complaining, my brother and I, that, we didn't want to spend another summer working around job sites cleaning up for my parents. And so there was a guy in town that had these established snow shacks, and he had a really good program. And so my parents did the initial lease for us on one of those. And man, we were pretty excited. And sure enough, we did what everybody good buddy would do. We were giving all of our friends free snow cones the first week, and then we had to buy more product. And, our till was a little bit empty. And, then we had to figure out things. We had to figure out what schedule it was, because it was just my brother and I. So we hired another employee, and we had a real simple schedule that we worked. And we did the IOU in the cash box, because back then, John, it was a cash box, right? I mean,
Yep.
and we had to
No one's
open a bank
Venmoing
account.
you for a
Yeah,
snow
no
cone back
Venmo,
then. Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But we did all these things, and it was on a very small scale with a very small enterprise. But at the end of the summer, this was back in, I think, 85, 86, we paid ourselves $3 an hour all year long. We had bus passes. We had the Roaring Springs Pass with the water park. So, we had these activities that we were paying for. And at the end of the year, we still had, $1,500, which was a really sizable chunk of money. And we learned all those business lessons in a way that we didn't really sit down like we were going to class. My parents just said, hey, what do you guys want to do about this? And we had a conversation around the dinner table, and we kind of came up with this idea of a schedule. And, we just did simple things like that. And it really didn't feel like we were being schooled. But at the end of it, we had figured those things out that carried on later into our lives. And it was absolutely those kinds of things that really infected us early on with the entrepreneurial bug, because back then, John, minimum wage was 4.25. I think it was
Yeah.
3.25. So we were making minimum wage, which was all we were capable of. But I was 13 years old. Nobody was going to hire me, you
Yeah.
know, and it sure was a lot easier job than being out mowing lawns or doing whatever else you could kind of drum up by talking to the neighbors and things like that. And so
Yeah, usually
it
those
was,
minimum wage jobs are not that much fun. Yeah.
they're not.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not. Sitting
Yeah.
in a snow shack talking to pretty girls when you're 11, 12, 13 years old was a lot of fun,
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my first entrepreneurial experience, and that was what really hooked me on the entrepreneurial journey.
But you'd actually observed your parents and your grandparents. I think it was your grandmother's best friend ran a large real estate brokerage
Yeah.
team. Tell us all about the lessons from that.
Yeah, so my great grandfather was selling real estate right after the Great Depression. So he didn't cause the Great Depression and the real estate price crash. But then my grandmother sold real estate. My mother was a real estate broker for over 40 years. Had I think 68 agents and retired abruptly at 72. Just decided she didn't want to be a broker, and she still holds her license. But what I saw there was it was about team management. And my grandmother's best friend, Adeline, ran a very successful Remax office into her 80s because she had assembled a team. And
Mm.
she had, I think, 170 agents with her and had built out just a powerful training machine and allowing new agents to get empowered and learn and connect. And I saw how that could work. John, if you're assembling a widget and you're putting a widget together, you have the power to put together 10 widgets a day. But if you've got a team of 30, well, now you're talking about 300 widgets a day. Even though your profit margin goes down because you're not making the hourly wage of assembling the widget, you're able to maximize that and really build. I think now everybody calls it scaling. You're able to scale
Yeah.
your business based on your ability to be someone that is not only visionary, but also can train and empower other people to do um, things that elevate the whole business.
Right, right. And maybe this is a contemporary thing, or maybe it's, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. Maybe it's a Bay Area thing, but I've observed, I was just talking to my wife about this a couple of days ago. In the real estate market over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of fluctuation. Like it seems like a real estate brokerage will get really big and all the agents go there. And then another one will become the hot place and they all go over there. And then another one becomes a hot place and they all go there. It happens over 5, 10 years or something like this. Maybe generationally that wasn't the case 30 years, 40 years ago, but what do you think is the secret to like keeping a team of people happy so that they aren't just going and chasing the next, lower commission or higher commission or whatever it is they were getting?
Well, I think that has to do with culture. I mean, there are a lot of brokerage in a boxes that come out that, promise this and do that and do all these other things. But at the end of the day, what is the culture? Who are you working with? Is it really a team environment? And when you have those structural building blocks of a good company, it's not about money all the time. People do weigh that and they say, hey, I can go make $1,000 more per sale over here, but am I going to get the support? Am I going to get the training? Am I going to get the assistance? Am I going to get the culture here where, we've been? And, my mother had, when she had her brokerage, she had agents with her for decades, that were just, consistent in staying there because the culture was good and all of the things that come with it that are non-monetary. And I think if all you're dealing with is based on price, yeah, you're going to see that, people go like, flocks. They go here, they go there. But, if you've really got a good culture and a good office environment of help and teamwork, you're going to be able to stay long term and keep a good solid core.
Now, when you were a kid, your father was a builder and a developer, and so you grew up around homes being built, and you actually end up again when you got a little older, you built your own house, like literally built your own house from learning that, and talk a little bit about that lesson of knowing how to do all of the things to the point where you can actually literally build a house.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd done all the parts, right? I mean, I'd run backhoes and dozers and I'd poured concrete and I'd done some small framing and stuff like that just growing up, just being around. But I told my dad when I was 19 that I wanted to build a house. I wanted to start building houses. And the first thing he said was go get the backhoe, So we went out, we dug the foundation, we hired the concrete guys to come in and put in the foundation. There was two other guys that I hired as framers. We framed the house as a little 1,100 square footer, 3 bed, 2 bath. We framed that in about 7 days, 8 days. And then had the HVAC and the plumbing crews come in and do all that work all the way through insulation. And then sheetrockers come in. I went in and stained and lacquered all the doors, painted it inside and out, poured all the flat work. We did the stucco on the house, did the cleanup, and had I built all the cabinets. And so while all of this was going on, I went and did all these other things so that it was ready. But it's funny, John, in my first house, I still remember this to this day. I go to install the cabinets, and the corner cabinet in the kitchen doesn't fit because the window got framed in the wrong spot. The window got framed over 8 inches. And so I had to go rebuild this cabinet, tear it all apart and rebuild it. And it took me a whole day to do that. And I was complaining, and my dad was sitting there going, well, why didn't you measure it? You built it. Why didn't you measure and double check the plans? And then before you went and built the cabinets, why didn't you measure it again? And it was a very important lesson on the, measure twice, cut once kind of thing. But it taught me what you need to look for when these things are going on. And so, after about 3 houses, I started to get a little bit of a team there where I didn't frame them anymore, and didn't do those kinds of things, because I was able to, again, have other people do that work, where I was able to go get another job and wound up getting a job for a company building a industrial building for them, which obviously was much larger than just a house, because I had other people doing the manual tasks and was able to elevate my experience and my expertise to be able to go out and talk to people and know what I'm talking about, but also knew how to build it.
It's funny how those lessons, like that 1,100 square foot house, a window being put in 8 inches over, the consequences of that happening on these larger scale projects that you've worked on are so much greater, right?
Yeah.
But you still, in the back of your mind, is the lesson that you learned from that when you're 19 years old, and having to put that in place. And I imagine now you have employees whose job it is to double check to make sure that everyone's putting the windows in the right place and the doors in the right place and the garage in the right place.
And they've all heard that story of that kitchen window. Every single one of them heard that story as to why that's important. You know. And I remember, I was installing some bathroom partitions. I had a side gig that I teamed up with a door installer one winter when things were a little bit slow, and we were installing some bathroom partitions in a building that was a $12 million building, and it was a concrete tilt up, and one of the panels got poured 1 inch too long. And the building was, they were literally setting the last panel when they figured this out, and they had to do some drastic things to make this work because somebody missed it, and the panel was 1 inch too long. And it's not like, these are concrete panels. They're 30 feet wide. They're, they were 38 feet tall.
Wow.
You don't just squeeze it in. You don't just kick this panel out. And so it's lessons like that cause serious disruption in schedule and in costs and things like that it's the small things, it's double checking them that really makes the difference.
The other thing that you experienced growing up is that your parents did a lot of 1031 exchanges, which is where you buy a house, you live in it for a couple of years, and then you get the gain tax free. So you say that you never really lived in a neighborhood for very long and ended up moving from house to house. Talk about that.
Well, I remember when 1031s came out, they weren't always available, but they came out, and my parents were talking about it. And, next thing you know, our house is for sale, and they had a lot of, they were developing commercial properties, and they would, instead of sell the property and enjoy the proceeds, they would sell the property and buy another piece of land and build another building. And I saw them really pay attention to that, and they were able to cut out the taxes that are involved with long-term capital gains. And it allowed them to retire at 50 years old because they weren't cutting off 20% of their income every time they sold something. And I remember one time, my dad had built a house that was in the parade of homes. It was, a large production, and everybody toured the house, and we were kind of getting excited because it was the final weekend of the parade. And my dad had said that if nobody buys this house, we get to move into it. We were so excited about having a new house that we could actually, that had all the upgrades and all this stuff. And I remember we started moving stuff in on Sunday night, and we were thinking, man, this is good. The parade of homes is over at 4:00. We started moving stuff in. they got a full price offer on Monday morning, and we had to move into a rental because my dad had already sold our house that we lived in. And so we lived in this rental that you had to literally kick the carpet down to get the door to close. It was that old orange shag carpet.
Uh-huh.
And it was so worn out that you had to, stamp it down so you could close your doors. But and we were constantly moving. But I watched my parents literally build a position that their monthly income. The last buildings I built for them was in 2001, and their monthly income has stayed on par with what they were making in '01 because of inflation and rent increases. But they've literally, parlayed everything they have, and they just did it again with another house that they had for a rental. And they're continuing that, they're in their 70s and they're continuing to do that.
They don't put down roots for very long in any one
No,
spot.
no.
Yeah, yeah.
About the
It's
time the carpet needs clean, we always sold them.
it's funny how those lessons that are so painful as a kid end up being the lessons that you really relish and drive you and motivate you and shape your life as an adult.
Well, and I've done that multiple times, built a house, uh, you know, uh, was living with my parents at the time so that we could build this house. 3 days before we moved into it, it sold. So I built one down the street. 11 months later, my wife came to me and said, "Hey, what if we built a little bit bigger floor?" We literally built this floor plan 5 times, and every time we built it, it got bigger. And we added a 3-car garage. We put a soaking tub in the master. We added a fireplace, a double head shower. We just did all these things. And as our family grew, it grew from 1,220 square feet up to about 2,700 square feet. But it was the same floor plan. We just kept moving because we could keep parlaying that equity until we still had the same house payment, but we had 2,600 square feet of house. And that was really where, things made sense because we weren't paying taxes on every single move. We were doing it strategically and keeping the tax man out of our business.
Yeah. Now you eventually go into the family business after a short stint in college. Your brother actually goes and makes about $50,000 one year right after high school, and you took a look at that. This is, I think, in the early '90s or something like that.
Yeah.
Back when $50,000 was a heck of a lot of money, I imagine. For any
94. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's a lot of money. And
yeah.
so you're thinking like, forget this, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go build some houses.
Yeah, I mean, I did a semester in college. I thought, what's the most progressive thing at the time? It was computer information systems, you know. And for context, John, I learned how to type in high school on a typewriter. We didn't even have computers at our high
I
school.
did too. I did
Right?
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know what that is, Google it. It'll help you
Typewriter.
out.
Yeah.
But I'm watching this happen, and it didn't take me long to realize I wanted to make money. I wanted to be able to afford a lifestyle for my family. It wasn't really about a passion for me. And so I quickly moved out of. I did a semester of college. I quit that and went on to build my businesses from there, and haven't looked back and haven't regretted it at all.
No.
But when it came to my own kids, I didn't want to be the dad that said, "Hey, college is garbage. You can't do that. You're wasting your money." And so we had a whole different experience with my kids on how we did that. But they also centered around conversations with money, because if you're going to handle it, you need to know how to handle it.
Right. And I want to get into those, but before I do, you eventually made the transition from working with your hands, building houses, to, I imagine, building a team to build a house. And then getting to the point of syndicating, which is bringing together different investors together for larger projects, which requires a whole different set of skills. That's not an easy transition. I have 2 people working in my house today that, been tradesmen their entire lives.
Yeah.
How did you make that transition from working with your hands with a hammer in your hands or a saw to the point of bringing together deals and investors and having to provide a return to your investors? Those are a totally different set of skills.
Well, I was sitting there in that 2,600 square foot house, and I would work during the day, doing all the things you just described, running heavy equipment and all that kind of stuff. And I would come home and I'd work on the spreadsheets and I'd work on the bids and I'd put all that together. And I'm thinking, man, this is just getting to be too much. And I had a good buddy of mine, Keith Hansen, who was running his own framing company, and he was trying to get out of the daily swinging a hammer too. And I thought, if I could make you my working superintendent, then I could have more time to finish up the bids, get the projects out, and go get more work, right? And so I literally had this conversation with my wife, and I said, I want to hire Keith, and I want to pay him. He's asking for $75,000 a year. She looked at me and she goes, we didn't make $75,000 last year. How are you going to do this, right? And so when I took that leap of faith, I was able to triple the size of the company in a year because I had more time, and I was able to then shrink what I was doing down into a skill set that fit and was able to put more deals together. Then as I started doing that, I started seeing deals that, hey, I would like to do this. I don't have a customer coming to me saying, hey, will you build this building? But here's a lot, here's what I can do. And I quickly found that I didn't have the money for it. So I would partner with a doctor, I'd partner with a high net worth individual. We'd do the deal, everybody would make money. And the last deal I did like that was in 2017. I started a 180 unit apartment complex with a family office that brought $19 million in capital to the deal. And it was just a really straightforward, split on, I built the buildings, they provided the capital. I had a property management team that was coming in that brought all that together. And then we would sell it and we'd split the profits. Well, after that, the family office kind of split up. And so I'd lost my capital source. And so in 2019, I had to go find another capital source. And so I began learning how to syndicate. And I was working with a guy that actually used to syndicate capital for movies. Because you can't get a loan to make the next Batman movie. Obviously, the Joker proved why you don't want to do that, right? The new Joker movie is just absolutely taking
massive bomb.
Right? But that's why you can't get a loan, right? And so he showed me how to stack capital and how to involve investors, and I gotten pretty good with Excel spreadsheets. And so then I just started talking to friends and family and growing my network. And over the last 4.5 years, we've raised about $75 million in capital and deployed for our investors. And we've had some really good exits for them because this is all a market that I learned from the very beginning when I built that first industrial building for myself in 2001 and used all my capital and realized I didn't like that. That was a very bad feeling for me because I had all my capital tied up in a very illiquid thing. And so then I began to partner, and how do you work those out? And it's just kind of been one slow step after another that, 30 years later, I look like an overnight success.
Well, it's really a process of looking at the list of tasks that you do, looking at the highest and best use of your time and everything below it, and just, eliminating those things, delegating those things, and sometimes taking a leap of faith, like you said, where you hire someone at $75,000 a year, even when you hadn't made it the year before,
right,
with that, knowledge that we're going to make this work because it's going to free up my time to bring in more deals. That's really cool.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the kids earlier. I want to hear about your son, because you had a deal with your kids where I love this because my first car was an absolute piece of crap. And I am really proud of that. But you went out and you bought a $1,500 junker car at auction and then said to your son, you're going to make me an $80 a month payment to cover everything on the car. Tell us a little about that.
Well, the thing is, how do you get a kid to understand how money works, right? How payments work, how you can get involved in deals where they say, hey, you're approved for this money, but you can't afford it, right? And so I went and got this car. I just finished a building for a car dealership, and they helped me. You went to the auction, we bought this car. And I said, I'll cover everything on it. It's $80 a month. You need to learn how to make a payment. And I didn't want him to get into a deal where, the alternator goes out, he's got to fix that. So I just said, this is the deal. And any of you kids that want to drive this car, it's $80 a month. And so when it all came their turn in Idaho, you could drive at 14 and a half. My youngest came to me. He wasn't quite 14 and a half. He said, Dad, I'm hoping you could take me to this job interview. I want to get a job. And I said, well, what do you need to get a job for? And he says, well, Dad, I got to have the $80 a month. I want the car. I got to have the $80 a month. And I said, well, where are you getting a job at 14 and a half? And he said, well, McDonald's. And McDonald's would hire, still will, at 14 and a half. And I did not have to ask any of my kids to go get a job because they knew that there was a financial reward for them that for $80 a month, he had a car that everything was covered on, and he made that payment religiously. And, once he'd done that for 2 years, I bought him a vehicle and sent him off to college with it. And he had a vehicle that he doesn't have a payment on. But it was through that where they learned that things cost money and nothing is free. And not that you can't give your kids, you can do whatever you want. They're your kids. But, when you put things out there, freedom and mobility and things like that, and make that something that they can find the positive in getting a job, because nobody likes getting a job. You're 14 years old. You want to go ride dirt bikes and go play with your friends and, Call of Duty or whatever. But when you realize that these are the things, this is the only way you're getting a car. This is the only way you're getting, either you're riding your bike to and from baseball practice, or you have a car to drive because you have a job. Yeah. And so by doing things like that, it really changed how they looked at work, not as something to be hated, but it was something that opened the door for them to do the things and have the things that they wanted.
Yeah. And I love that you charged that amount. It was something meaningful. It wasn't debilitating. It wasn't minuscule. It was something meaningful that they had to pay for. And I went to a high school where there were a number of kids in my school whose parents bought them a brand new, car when they got 16. And man, did they not appreciate it. Most of them would run into something or, damage it in some way.
And, 3 of my kids all drove this car and they all hit something with it, but it wasn't, it was a $1,500 car, right? You didn't even bother fixing it. I think, my daughter is still driving that car today. It's got a white bumper on the back, because somebody ran into her and she made some money on the insurance and didn't want to spend the money fixing this old car, but it runs fine. And it's one of those things that once they've learned what payments cost them and what it does for their future, they've gotten pretty okay with not having them if they can.
What about for dad? What about for you? Imagine you live in a nice neighborhood. You've done well in your career. You've got neighbors, right? And what is it about you that, that you're okay with your son or daughter driving this junky car around town? Is there a part of you that maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you seem like it's a point of pride.
Absolutely.
That your kids are driving this junky car around town.
Well, let's go into the fact that my daughter's driving this car that's still worth $1,500, but has $65,000 in the bank, right?
And I want to get to that.
Let's talk about it.
So talk about the daughter.
The rest of the story, it really is a nice story. I live in a neighborhood. I live in $1.5 million home that I rent because I can rent it for about $4,000 less than a payment would be on it. And I live in the same neighborhood, and my money is invested that I would have to invest in a down payment on this house is invested that's making a return that more than pays the rent on it.
This is really interesting. Someone is a 4th generation in real estate and you rent because
the thing is, your house does not make you money because you're the guy that has to pay for it. Right.
Right.
So, if you just figure out what the payment is on $1.5 million house, right? You got to put 20% down. You got to put a minimum of 10% down at that part, but usually that's a jumbo loan. So you got to put 20% down. So you have $300,000 tied up in this that you can't use. Or I could rent the house. My rent's $3,500 a month, and I'm absolutely top of the market. But that $300,000 that I put down is making me 12%. It's paying my rent, and that's growing, right? So there's different ways to look at debt, right? And so when you understand that, it's the same position my kids were in, right? They understood what was good debt and what was bad debt.
And talk about that. So your daughter decides to go to culinary school, and you had this great story where you said to her, "I will pay for your cost of the culinary school," but you had a big condition. Talk about it.
Well, my daughter, she comes to me and she's all starry eyed, man. And we love to cook, right? Her and I, that's always our thing. We love to be in the kitchen. But she comes back and, Dad, I really want to go to Culinary Institute of New York. And it's this beautiful school, amazing campus, great 5-star program. You could list the alma mater that came out of there. They're all over TV and everything. And I said, man, that sounds amazing. How are you going to pay for that? And she goes, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I said, I will, I want to see results for my money, right? And so I said, listen, let's teach you again about debt. So we went and got student loans, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
willing to loan you money. Uh, and I said, when you've worked in your field of study for 2 years, I'll pay for it. Okay. So really think about what you want, because if you go get a sociology degree, is that going to provide you with the lifestyle you want? Is it going to do the things that you want? And are you going to do that? There's so many people that go get a college degree and never use it. So she does that. She goes to school, has a great time, winds up with a great degree, comes back, goes to work. She hadn't been there. I think she was there right at 2 years when she comes to me and says, okay, Dad, I've been here 2 years. What about paying for this? And I sat down with her and see, when you get out of college, you got to start making that payment. So she was making a $500 payment every single month on her student loans. And she's like, man, this is aggravating. And I go, yeah, but look at where it got you, right? You got value for it. You're making better money because you have the degree. All of this is working. And so she came to me and she said, Dad, I've been here 2 years. You could pay for it. And I said, you're right. Bring me your stuff. We sat down and I wrote out the check, and I left it blank on who it was to intentionally. And I said, Kyla, I can either pay off your student loans right now and you have no more $500 payment. She goes, man, that would sure feel good. I said, or I could show you how to invest this money that will make you more than the $500. You'll be able to grow this, pay off your student loans, and have money for down payment on a house, maybe start your own restaurant. And she goes, what? And I go, well, how do you think I make my money? Right. And so it began this conversation that we began to have a monthly investment conference where we would talk about, well, what about this? And I'm looking at that. And she began to really learn what it meant to be an investor. And I'm very proud to say that today, 3.5 years, 4 years later, she's completely paid off her student loan debt, and she's got $65,000 that she's managed to invest and grow, and she's still investing and growing. And
Amazing.
so she's learned that the culinary school came with a cost. She's learned how to make payments on that debt. She learned how to invest to pay off that debt. She understood that had she paid off that in full, yes, she would have avoided 8% or 9% interest on those student loans, but she would not have ever had the opportunity to become an investor. And so there's times in your lives where good debt is a good thing. Debt is a good thing because you're utilizing that debt to improve your life, and investing also is a good thing. And so she was able to do that by herself, created a nice nest egg. She's getting done with an assignment in Colorado Springs. Will be back here in December, and probably going to look to buy her first house. So she's 25 years old. She's got enough to put 20% down on a house and be in really great shape to move forward.
And did you have her invest all of that money in one of Dad's syndicated projects, or did you?
No.
So what were the investments that you helped to guide her through?
We looked at all different kinds of things. We looked at stocks. We looked at crypto. We looked at annuities. We looked at all different kinds of things, and we got a feel for what we needed. And I hear this from a lot of people. They come to me and they say, "Hey, I really want to invest for cash flow." And my first question is, if you got a 7% return on the money you have, can you live your life? Well, no, I can't. Then you really need to invest for growth. And having that conversation with her, she understood. See, when you're 65 years old, you don't have time to go make more money. So you need a safer investment that's doing 6 or 7% on a quarterly return. But when you're young, you can take bigger risks. You can do different things. And she was able to really do some things that really grew that money very rapidly, and was able to take advantage of that and create a nest egg. Well, obviously, the larger that nest egg got, the more conservative she's gotten in what she's doing. But it really was something that helped her to grow that. And now she's asking me for advice instead of me always stepping in like dads do and telling them what we think they ought to do, even though they didn't ask.
Yeah, it's so nice to be able to be on a kind of a level playing field there, where they're actually interested in the advice, and you're not trying to stuff it down their throat and get them to listen to you.
Absolutely.
All right, I want to ask you also about you have a stepdaughter who wanted to go into the dental field, and you sat her down and kind of explained to her that, either if she becomes a like an oral surgeon versus a dentist versus a dental assistant, talk about that.
Well, she was coming to me and she wanted to be in the dental field, but all she wanted to do was spend the least amount of money she could, get the quickest degree she could so she could get to making money. She really had this drive and this desire to make money today. And so I had an oral surgeon who was an investor of mine, still is. And so I said, "Hey, Doc, can we catch up with you?" And so we went over to his office and I said, "Hey, tell me about a dental hygienist. What's it cost to get that?" And he says, "It's about 30 grand. It's about 18 months." I said, "Well, what do you make?" He says, 50 to 60,000 a year. I said, "Okay." I said, "What's it take to become a dentist?" He said, "About 6 years and about $150,000 worth of school." She goes, "Oh my gosh, $150,000. That's an enormous amount of money." And I said, "Well, Doc, what do they make?" He says, "About 200 to 250 a year." And I said, "Well, that kind of makes sense. You're making a lot more money." I said, "What about an orthodontist?" He said, "Well, you add another year of school at another 70 grand." And I said, "Well, what do they make?" "About 300, 350." And I said, "Well, Doc, what do you make?" And he said, "Well, I'm an oral surgeon. I had to go to another year of school. I'm in at $400,000 into my education. About this time, my stepdaughter's almost unconscious. She's just about to pass out and hyperventilate. $400,000. Oh my gosh, student loan debt." And I said, "Doc, what do you make?" He says, $500,000, 550 a year. And so I quickly put together a spreadsheet. And I said, "What if you're making $500,000 a year for 20 years versus making 60,000 a year for 20 years?" And the bottom line number was astronomically different. And my daughter really began to understand that by borrowing $400,000, she would be able to really change the course of her life and how she was going to be able to retire. You know, I mean, you're making $550,000 a year. You've got the ability to put away a couple hundred grand a year, live a really nice life, put away a couple hundred grand a year. In 20 years, retirement is very possible. So you went to school from 18 to 26. You started your career. You could literally be done by 46, 50 years old with a multi-million dollar retirement versus getting out of school in 18 months and going to work right away because you're not at the lowest cost. You've spent more money. You're now making more money and things are working better for you. So there again, incurring all that debt could be a good thing if that's what you really look at for the long-term picture. But you have to understand, what is this education going to buy me and what am I going to be able to do with it and what's that going to act like long-term?
Yeah. Shannon, I have so much more I could ask you, but I know we're short on time, so I'll wrap things up there. Thank you so much for your time. I'd love for people to be able to learn more about you and check you out online. Where can people go to learn more about you?
All my socials, everything is just right at shannonrobnett.com. You can book an appointment with me. We can chat about what you're doing in your investment space. I'd love to have the conversation and love to provide more information.
Awesome, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.